fellow bookworms to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and I have another 25 Days of Bookmas reading update for you guys. Got another one read, and today we are going to be talking about Dust by Joan Frances Turner. It's at the bottom of the list, and I really wasn't expecting to enjoy this, and it is another 4-star read, almost 5 stars. So far, I'm 2 for 2 as far as enjoyment, even though I put these guys at the bottom and did not expect to enjoy them. But definitely really loved it, and I'm going to talk about it in just a second. Before I do, though, just a reminder, we do our Book of the Month discussion questions every Monday. We are getting ready to start February's Book of the Month, which is Mother of Pearl by Melinda Haynes. I really hope you will participate. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, the discussion questions you can take as seriously as you want to. You can either just kind of listen to them and my thoughts on the book and kind of think about your own opinions, or you can actually sit down and answer them if you want to. But I really do hope you will participate. I absolutely love those videos, and they're some of my favorites to do. We also do weekly Wednesday reads. We also do a Throwback Thursday, and Series Saturday has resumed. Those videos will be popping up here and there, along with other bonus videos like this one, as I work my way through my 25 Days of Bookmas books and my ABC Author Challenge books. I know there hasn't been an update on that for a while, other than in the intro to this videos, or to my videos, because I am still working on The Tenets of Time by Thomas Flanagan. That is 820 pages, and it is dense. Like, there is a lot packed into those pages. And so I'm just over 200 pages now. I'm on to chapter 10, which is part 2 of the book. So I am working my way through it. It's just the chapters are so long, I really need to set aside like a chunk of a day in order to finish out a whole chapter, and it takes a lot of time. So hopefully I will have an update on that soon. I'm really hoping I can get through it, by mid-February, but we shall see. So if you haven't already, please give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on a thing. And yeah, let's get into Dust. So I'm going to be going through the CAWPILE rating first, and then we will talk a little bit more about the book itself. If you're interested in the CAWPILE rating system, the original creator's channel is linked down in the description, so you can definitely check out her channel. And she also has a spreadsheet you can download if you want to do it for your own reading. So for characters, I actually gave the characters an 8. That would have been higher, except in the beginning, I really didn't enjoy the book at all, and I didn't enjoy the characters. I didn't think they had a lot of depth to them, but by the end, I thought they were very well developed, and I really enjoyed the characters, and I felt a strong connection, especially to the main character. So, it would have been higher, but still a pretty high rating. Atmosphere, I actually gave a 9. I thought the atmosphere was done really well. I really enjoyed it. And so yeah, gave it a higher score. Writing has the lowest score with 7. The writing, if it wasn't for the beginning of the book, again, it would have been a lot higher. But just the beginning of the book, I really didn't enjoy the writing. I didn't enjoy the characters. And so that's why it's not higher. Plot, I gave a 10. I thought the plot line was phenomenal. I really enjoyed what the author did with that. And so it got a 10 out of a 10 for me. Intrigue, I gave a 9. Again, that probably would have been a 10, but the beginning of the book, I just did not enjoy it. If I hadn't read the synopsis and had an idea of what was going to happen, I probably may have DNF'd it. Probably not, because I have a really hard time DNFing books, but I think a lot of people would have DNF'd it if they really didn't know what to expect going in. And yeah, so that's why it got dropped down. Otherwise, it would have been 10 out of 10, because based on the synopsis, and by the middle of the book, I was fully intrigued. So, logic, I did give a 10. Again, that one, I almost actually dropped down, because why the logic of the plot line I thought was really well done. There was certain parts where it was kind of like, what? There's like this musical aspect to the zombies, and that really was kind of confusing for me, although it does kind of tie in the end. And since that, I don't know, it ties into the plot line, but it's not like a major part of the plot line. And so I ended up giving the logic a 10 just because I was thinking about the plot line itself. So, and enjoyment, I gave it 8. Again, that would have been higher if it wasn't for the beginning of the book because I really did not enjoy the beginning of the book. And yeah, so of average rating was 8.71, which transfers to a 4-star rating, but it is almost a 5-star. 5-star ratings are an average from 9 to 10. And so it was super close to being a 5-star. But again, I think it's just the beginning of the book. The beginning of the book had been better. I probably would have been a 5-star read for me. So those are my CAWPILE ratings. And then the average, of course. But yeah, absolutely ended up loving this. And so the premise of the book is it follows Jessie, who's the main character, and she's part of this gang of zombies. And you have zombies and you have humans. And then there's this new kind of creature that comes onto the scene. And there's a disease that are making zombies more human and humans more zombie like. So that's all in the synopsis. And that part, like the disease, was what really intrigued me and was why I kept pushing through the beginning of the book, even though I really did not enjoy it. In the beginning of the book, the characters just seemed very juvenile and very savage. Like there was a certain brutishness to them that I did not enjoy. And I didn't really understand why uh until later on in the book. Like then it kind of made sense why they acted the way they did, but in the beginning I did not enjoy it. I thought like they had no respect for each other or anything like that. And then the main character, her romantic relationship is very very toxic, and just the overall interactions between all the members of the gang is very very toxic. And I did not enjoy that. There wasn't a whole lot of depth to the characters. You just saw them as these like brutish zombies that were gross, and there's this very kind of gory and disgusting, which was one thing I thought would hang me up on the book. When I was reading the synopsis, I didn't know how I would enjoy that gore aspect. And I actually don't mind gore so much, but I don't know, it has to be done in a certain way, and the way the author actually handle the gore and such made sense. It made sense for the story. And so that part didn't bother me. It was more the toxic relationships and the juvenile behavior and just kind of the savageness of these zombies. And so yeah, in the beginning I did not enjoy the writing style. I did not enjoy the characters, and it was really kind of a push to get to the point where I started to enjoy it. So I first marked a page on page 103, and that was just marking what I didn't like about the characters. And then the next marker is kind of farther in on page 160. And again, just marking how I didn't like the characters. And then from there, starting on page 204, so about 200 pages in, that's when I really started to enjoy the book. And you can see I ended up marking it all up. There's just so many little moments where I found kind of interesting because you have these zombies and they try so hard not to act like humans. And that was another thing. Humans are called who's. And it seemed very childish. And I was like, who's, like, you couldn't come up with a better name than that. But then thinking about it later, you have like The Walking Dead and they call the zombies walkers. Like, how original is that? So, you know, whatever. It's an alternate world. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I did not enjoy the characters and I did not enjoy how they were portrayed. Um, and I didn't really, at that point, you have no sense of the plot or anything like that. So there's really no where the book was going. You just had all these toxic relationships. So anyway, I'm really glad I pushed through because it really, once you kind of start getting into the actual relationships between these characters and why they act the way they do, and how they kind of view humans and such. Um, you really start to get a sense of why they act the way they do, and you start to see that little bit of humanity left in them. And then you start getting into the main plot line of this disease and how it came about and how it's affecting, the zombies and how it's affecting the humans. And then there's like a lot of family ties that come into play with the main character. And I love how it all played out. So that's kind of the gist of the book. Like I said, if you can get past the gore, and like if you like zombies and you can don't mind the gore and such, um, you still might not enjoy the beginning of the book. But if you can kind of keep pushing through, like it is well worth it. 100%, I think. I think the story, like I said, is really, really good, and I like the plot, and I like those family connections, and kind of just the overall question of humanity and what makes somebody human, you know? Um, and so yeah, absolutely loved it. I'm gonna kind of get into more kind of spoiler-esque territory. So if you want to jump off now, just know like if you are kind of into zombies and or supernatural and such, that if you can kind of push through, the book does get a lot better. And you might enjoy kind of that juvenile aspect that I didn't. Who knows? But I do think the book is worth it to kind of push through if you can kind of get past the gore and the juvenile behavior and such. If you don't like zombies and you're not into that type of like supernatural thing, it might not be the book for you, which is fine. That's not going to be for everybody. But I did think it was really well done, and I do think there's a good story there past the zombie part of the book. So, anyway, go ahead, jump off now if you don't want any spoilers. So, now let's go ahead and talk about the gang of zombies. So you have Jesse, and there's a whole gang of zombies, and the way they treat each other, like I mentioned, was very toxic. Like they almost go above and beyond being brutish and like fighting with each other. Like they don't want those ties to their humanity. It's almost like because they're not human anymore, that they kind of see any human emotion or anything like that as a weakness. And you gotta imagine, like, you died and came back to life, but your body is like rotting and you have to eat. Like, Jessie, the main character, is a vegetarian in the beginning, and she's having to now live off meat. When she comes back to life, so raw meat, like fresh raw meat, like not even just meat. And so you can imagine the trauma that goes along with that, and so they kind of want to suppress the human nature, and they kind of look down on humans for like kindness and such. And so there's a lot of fighting. And that being said, like still the relationship between Jessie and kind of her romantic interest is so toxic. Like even with how the zombies are in general, that relationship itself is toxic. Like I mean, absolutely brutal. They get into these major fights and are just cruel to each other. And not all the zombies are like that, because she kind of has another zombie who I think is into her, but she's obviously into this other zombie, so like whatever. But he isn't like that. Like he's very kind and such, and she kind of treats him how she gets treated by her boyfriend, for lack of a better word. um so it's just very, very toxic, and they it's just accepted that they treat each other that way. um and so yeah, I did not like that. And then you have the zombies themselves, and at first I didn't really like how graphic she was with the goriness of their state, but I thought she did a very good job, because you can imagine if zombies were real, they would still follow kind of the pattern of decay. And that's how she presented them. Like when you're first zombie, you know, you're still kind of fresh essentially, and then you start to break down. And so then you have zombies. I forget, she has terms for each of them. But then you become a bloater, I think is the next one. And it kind of reminded me of like uh is it Resident Evil vibes where you have the different levels. So anyway, so then you kind of become a bloater and you start, you know, the gases are being released and everything. And then from there, I think it's a feeder, where you have like the bugs feeding on you. And then you become more like a skeleton or an ancient, or I don't remember what the term was for those ones. And so at first, like I didn't enjoy that. It's like it's very graphic and very kind of gory. But then I was like, this kind of makes sense. Like that, you know, if zombies were real and they were how the lore presents them, there would be that natural progression of decay. And so I actually really enjoyed that part once I kind of got over the kind of like factor. I actually really enjoyed that because I like kind of that sciency type, you know, how nature works and such. And I follow, I think, it's Ask a Mortician here on YouTube. I absolutely love her videos, and you know, I love that kind of thing. So it really made sense how she did that, and I really enjoyed it. So then you kind of have this disease presented, and they have a leader, like they are a gang, and so there's also kind of that brutality aspect because they are a gang, and so you have a leader, and the leader is the one that starts acting weird and gets sick, and they have this girl that comes, it's a human, so who, and she's drunk. And so they had just eaten, they kind of live out in the country, this gang, and so they feed on animals versus humans. So some of them will go into the cities and feed on humans too, but they mainly feed on animals. And so they had just fed, and this human wanders into their territory, and so they just kind of scare her and shake her up. And so that's their first clue. 'Cause she ends up showing up like the next day. They do like patrols, and she ends up showing up, and that's their first clue that hey, something's weird about her. Like she's not human, but she's not one of us, but she's like decaying and looks really sickly and gross. And so what is up? And she actually ends up dying, and so they go and move her body because they're not sure what's happening, and they don't really trust each other in this game. Like this is Jesse and Florian, who is like the one of the eldest zombies, and they zombies do eventually end up dying too. Like they get so old where they just kind of desiccate and end up dying. And so it's her and this older zombie, and they move the body. The body ends up disappearing, and they don't really trust each other, so they don't really mention it to anybody else. And then you have this weird scent on their leader, um, and they don't know what the scent is, and she's acting weird, like she's not eating with them and hunting with them. And then they kind of start snooping around, and they end up finding Jesse's brother, who's part of the scientist group in the labs. And he has this group of humans that have the disease and so are like desiccating, and they're hungry and they can't keep anything down. So they're constantly throwing it up. And so her brother ends up finding her. Um, and she has a sister who's still alive as well. Her parents ended up dying with her, and she never really knows what happens to them. But so she ends up, he kind of is part of this zombie research facility, and she ends up being able to communicate with him. He takes like a swab, and then they end up going back. And so they learn this information, and in the meantime, you have her boyfriend who's just acting kind of weird. And there's this other gang that's kind of big in the city, the Rats. And so he mentions that there's some of them at a church that have that smell too. And so they end up going to investigate that, and they kind of get a little bit more information from that side of things. And it ends up turning very, very brutal. And so you kind of see at that point that this gang does have a lot of humanity to them, and then you have rats who are brutal and were probably that brutal in life too. Like if they were a human gang, they would still be that brutal. And so you start seeing more of the humanity of like the other characters and such. And they're not just these savage zombies or anything like that, or the savage gang. either. So I really like that. And so they learn more, and then they kind of go back and they the a couple of the other members think that they're kind of tainted, especially Jesse, like her boyfriend, for lack of a better term, mentioned that she smells mostly like herself, but like there's something up with her. Um, and so yeah, and then there's just this whole the truth comes out about her boyfriend, and he's kind of been playing her against the others and such, and so she can't trust him anymore. And again, just the toxic relationship between those two, like it's really not surprising that he ended up lying to her and then kind of throwing her to the wolves as far as the other members of the gang were concerned. So she still has herself and the other guy who's into her, but she's not into him. And then you have this new zombie that is has been embalmed, and so they kind of treat her even worse than how they treat each other because she's been embalmed and they kind of look down on that. And so you have her too that's kind of tagging along. So you have that trio, and then the others things happen to them and they kind of disperse. And so you have this trio still trying to kind of figure out what's going on. And they end up transforming, and then the other guy ends up coming back into her life, along with some of the other zombies, like the leader and the other zombies that have fully transformed. Um, and so once they transform, like because of the disease, so they become more human, but they're still zombies, and they lose some of that humanity. So you kind of see that viciousness because even though as zombies that hunger takes them, they can get some satisfaction. Whereas these disease zombies and these disease husbands or humans, they can never get that satisfaction no matter how much they eat. And so there's almost a coldness to them and they kind of lose that touch of humanity that they had. And so there's this big tragic event, and she ends up almost dying, and her sister comes into play. And then they're kind of going through the stages of the disease and trying to figure out how it's going to progress. And the whole world basically kind of falls apart because you have really sick humans who are like desiccating and dying and transforming because of the disease, and zombies that are becoming stronger and faster and more lifelike, but they're so hungry, and then eventually they reach a point where this disease progress, and so they're trying to figure out what's going on. And there's a tie to Florian, who talked about the beaches and how he lived so long because of something in the beaches, and that's where it all started. And there's kind of like this meteorite that happened and such, and so there's kind of this science fiction element to it too, which I thought was really cool. And the sand has like music. And so they end up going on trying to get to this beach, but they're slowly getting weaker and weaker, and they're starting to not be able to keep any food down or anything like that. So they're just basically starving to death, and they need to get to the beach because that's how they're going to survive. And so that's kind of how it ends up tying together in the end, is with them trying to go to this beach. Um, and that's where one of the things that didn't make sense to me is kind of how zombies communicate, because obviously, everything's rotting, so they can't physically talk, and so they kind of have this telepathic communication. um and the way she hears it is like instruments, so banjo or a violin or trumpet. And that kind of made sense once you kind of get the idea of the meteor and how the sand kind of has like this music to it too. But they have these things called dances where they don't know why, but all of a sudden, like the music just kind of comes together and all the zombies end up kind of like dancing with each other, because they all hear the music and it kind of ends up being like an orchestra. I guess she doesn't exactly say that, but that's how it's described, how I envision it. And that part didn't really make sense. But then when you kind of get the idea of the sand and such, it does. I don't know. It was really weird. And so I don't really know how to feel about that part yet. But again, it does kind of tie into the plot line, but not really. And so it's just something you can kind of overlook. But one of my favorite parts I marked at the end is she's kind of getting delirious at this point because she's starving to death and she's really weak. And so she's kind of in and out and she's getting very delirious. And so she kind of goes back and forth. She talks to Florian in her head and he's encouraged her to get to the beach. Like that's where it all started and everything. But then she has this whole conversation with Death. And Death is coming in and he's like, I've always been around. And then Death is life. And it's just so beautiful. And it kind of almost got philosophical there for a moment when she's having this conversation with Death. And I don't know, like that part like completely made the book for me. I absolutely loved it. And she has like multiple conversations with Death the whole time she's kind of going in and out, but there's one kind of drawn out one where at first it's I think it's Florian and then it changes into Joe or Jim and then it kind of just changes and she recognizes Death for who he is. And she's like, no, I'm going to the beach. Like, I don't care what you say. I'm going to the beach. And she has this whole conversation with Death. And I mean, chef's kiss. Like, that one, like, that whole part, I want to read it again. Like, it was just so beautifully done. So, but yeah, overall, I thought, you know, the author, like, yeah, it started off slow and these characters weren't very likable and they had no depth to them. But once she hit her stride, like, I mean, it just all came together and it was so beautiful. And you have like this question of, I don't know, like, what is humanity? Like, what is it? Um, and it was beautiful and I love the whole death thing. So anyway, I don't have anything else to say. Like I'm trying to explain it without giving away too much because I think you really just need to read the book to enjoy it and understand it. But yeah, I thought it was very very well done. Worth it. The end is 100% worth it to muddle through the beginning. But I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. The next book I'm going to be reading is Blood and Fire by Shannon Mckenna. This is another one I'm not really expecting to enjoy very much because it's more of like a steamy romance. But I think if the plot is done well, I think I will enjoy it because it kind of has this girl who's on the run from some assassins that she thinks killed her father, and she ends up going to this guy who is linked somehow, and he's just trying to save his family business. So, I think if the plot line's really well developed, I will enjoy this one, but I just don't know because sometimes it's hit and miss when a book is very focused like on romance and like the steamy side of things. So we shall see. But hopefully, I'll have another update for you guys soon on this book. And yeah, happy reading, everyone. Bye.